Rahim. Someone came to me, well, first of all, we started at 9:30 and we ended at 12, 2.5 hours, 9:30 to 12, 2.5. And then we had a little tea break, and then we had about 50 minutes of question and answer, but still we could not complete the subject of RIBA. Even the half an hour that we now have still would not be enough. Someone came to me and said, I need to buy a house. It's a critical need for that. The house is on sale for 500,000 rands, and I need another 200,000. And I'm going to get it from the bank. What alternative is there for me? Because I desperately need the house. I have the children. But first of all, you must in your heart have this firm resolve. I'd rather dig my grave and bury myself, but I don't want RIBA, not for me, not for my family, not for my children, no. And then you must raise your hands and make dua to Allah, who has already said, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. Whosoever has fear of Allah, ila akhir al-ayah, He will open a way for you. If you have money and you do not want it to remain unused, don't put it in the bank in a fixed deposit so that the bank will invest it and the bank will give you a fixed return on your money so you get some income. No. You invest it yourself. You see? So this becomes a partnership that you will put up the 200,000 and that person will put up the 300,000. Or if you don't have 200,000, two people with 100,000 each. Or four people with 50,000 each. Will put up the balance and the house is bought. When the house is bought, you are not the sole owner. All those who have participated become partners in the ownership of the house. Good. So you have 60% ownership, and that person who paid the 200 has a 40% ownership in the house. The partnership is responsible for paying taxes. The partnership is responsible for maintenance and repairs in the proportion of ownership. So if it's 1,000 rands to be paid for maintenance, you will pay 600 and your partner will pay 400 because you have a 60% ownership. It's called equity, 60% equity, 40%. Now, the partnership now signs an agreement with you, a rental agreement. And the rental agreement is based upon market rental value, which is determined independently. Suppose the market rental value is 5,000 rands a month. Then you will pay, in order to occupy the house, you will pay 5,000 rands a month. When you do that, 3,000 will come back to you. So you're paying only 2,000. But the book shows that you paid 5, and then 3,000 came back to you because you have a 60% ownership in the house. And your partner will get 2,000 rands. This is halal for him. I have never found as yet, apart from one PhD thesis, one solitary, any attack on the validity of a rental agreement. So I'm not that much of a scholar in this field to be able to critically determine the subject. But because I have not seen anything that is credible as an attack on a rental agreement that is invalid, I have come to the conclusion, as everybody else have come to the conclusion, that a rental agreement is permissible in Islam. Good. But the partnership will sign a second agreement, two agreements, independent agreements. You can't have the two agreements in one. And the second agreement permits you to buy the ownership that your partner has in the house. Buy either in stages or whenever you are in a position to buy. So 1 year you'll buy 10% from his 40. So yours become 17, his is 30. But every time that you buy part of the ownership of the house or part of the equity, it must always be on the basis of the market value of the house, which can change, yes? It can go up, it can go down. Because in Islam, business transactions are always made in the market, meaning at market price. Eventually, you now own 80% of the house, and your partner owns 20%. So when you pay you're still paying your 5,000 every month in rent, but now 4,000 comes back to you, and 1,000 goes to your partner. Until eventually you buy out your partner, and you have 100% ownership of the house. You have paid less this way than if you had gone to the bank to borrow the 2,000, because you've cut out a third party. Number two, you've not entered into RIBA, except the part about being brands. If you can designate the transaction in dinars and work in dinars, you cut out that part of it. And number three, your partner has received a halal return on his investment. So here is a method in which you can buy houses, buy cars and so on, without entering into RIBA. You just have to look for people who want to invest their money halal. I don't want to put the money in a fixed deposit. Any questions on this answer? Good, so you can continue. Very good, mashallah. You must not invite too many questions. People want to sleep. Number two, those of you who heard the radio talk last night would have heard that the suspiciously docile conduct of the Egyptian armed forces in the face of the Egyptian uprising, dramatic Egyptian uprising. You know, I had something like that in Egyptian history, not even in the case of the Jamal Abdel Nasser revolution. We are anticipating that suspicious, docile conduct has a story behind it. And the story behind it is that the next chapter would be that the Egyptian armed forces are going to hold elections in Egypt, that they're going to be very strange for Egyptians who are already so accustomed to voting 99% in favor of Hosni Mubarak, and you know. But now this is going to be strange. This is going to be a rare election. Huh? And the Egyptian armed forces or the government will try to stack the table in favor of the Islamic movement. I'm not using any names, and I'm saying Islamic movement. And it is not far-fetched for us to anticipate that a couple of months down the road, the Islamic movement in Egypt could form the government. One of the reasons why the Egyptian people came out onto the streets so dramatically in such huge numbers, one of the reasons, is because of biting poverty and destitution amongst the masses of Egypt, the overwhelming majority of whom could never afford to come to this retreat. So they would be looking forward with tears in their hearts that Islam will take them out of poverty. Islam will take them out of this biting misery, because we now have Islam in government. When they become even poorer, when an Islamic government comes, that will set the stage for the slaughter of Islam. Lots of people will lose faith in Islam. Credibility will be gone. But why would an Islamic government in Egypt fail to take the people out of fighting poverty and destitution? RIBA is the reason. Sheikh Muhammad Abdu, the Sheikh al-Azhar, 100-something years ago, the end of the last century, went to Europe. This is after the French Revolution had broken the back of the Christian church, and the prohibition of RIBA, which had been enforced in Christian Europe. Just read that. You know the British Sheikh I talk about? What was his name? Shakespeare, yeah. What was the name of the book? Merchant of Venice. The back of the Christian church was broken in Europe, and an economy had emerged now which was based on RIBA. The political system also, the back of the Christian church was broken. Europe was Christendom. And as Christendom, Europe recognized Allah, meaning God, as Al-Malik. We call it divine right of kings. The theory, the political theory. And Al-Malik appointed the church as his representative, his Khalifa, church in Rome, the Pope. And the Pope had to anoint you as king or as emperor. Otherwise, you would have no legitimacy in the eyes of the people. So there was this divine component which recognized Allah's sovereignty. The French Revolution destroyed that, and a new political system emerged in Europe, in which Allah is no longer sovereign, the state is now sovereign. Parliament is sovereign, Supreme Court is sovereign. Allah can make a law to prohibit RIBA. We, the state, make it halal. Both the economic part and the political were shirk. Shirk. The very foundation was shirk. But Sheikh al-Azhar forgot to take his torchlight with him when he went to Europe. So he couldn't see the shirk. So he came back to Egypt and made a statement which Sheikh al-Azhar said, I went to Egypt and I found Islam, but I did not find Muslims.
Europe.
So I went to Europe. I went to Europe And I found Islam, but I did not find Muslims. And I've come back to Egypt where I find Muslims, but I do not find Islam. Meaning he was utterly and totally and completely deceived by Europe. He then went on to issue his infamous fatwa. The British who were in in Egypt, controlling Egypt, really, the figurehead, Egyptian government was at the figurehead. The British decided to establish an efficient postal system. So the Egyptian post office was established. And they decided that the Egyptian post office must be funded through public funding. People would invest in a commercial enterprise called the post office. And this is something that the Egyptian people can see. It is very beneficial that you can mail parcels and mail letters and so on to the post office. But they said that when you invest your money in the post office, you're going to get a fixed return on your investment. And Sheikh Al-Azhar gave the fatwa that this is not RIBA. A fixed return is RIBA because it is not business. In order for it to qualify as business, you must embrace risk. You can make a profit or you can suffer a loss. That is business. But here is a fixed return. Come rain or come sunshine, you're getting your return on your investment. And so this is not business, this is RIBA. Egypt, to this day, is still imprisoned by that fatwa. The second part of the equation is that not only has Al-Azhar University been imprisoned by this fatwa, and Al-Azhar up to today is insisting that bank interest is not RIBA, but the second part about it is up to this day Al-Azhar has not recognized the modern monetary system of paper money, non-redeemable paper money, to be bogus, to be fraudulent, to be haram. And so there is no way that an Islamic government in Egypt, in this context, can escape an attack by the enemy to make the Egyptian people even poorer than they are now. When I arrived in Egypt in 1963, you were not born as yet, no? In 1963, one Egyptian pound, how much was it, I think? It was about 1.5 US dollars, I think, 1 pound. And the sterling pound was about 3 Egyptian pounds to 1 sterling pound, was that? Anyhow, so you're getting a salary, you work for the whole month, and you get a salary in Egyptian pounds, in paper of course. And with your salary for a whole month, you could buy a camel. Huh? But then something strange happened to the Egyptian pound. After a few years, and now the same amount of work, and the same salary you're getting, you can't buy a camel anymore, you can only buy a donkey. Huh? And then a couple of years later, Zimbabwe is laughing, eh? You can't buy a donkey anymore. You can only buy a goat. And then a couple of years later, The same salary, same work. You can't buy a goat anymore, you could only buy a chicken. Huh? It's called inflation. Inflation. And the normal way of understanding inflation is that the prices are going up. No, you dumb. It's not the prices going up, it's the money going down. This bogus and fraudulent monetary system has within it an inbuilt mechanism to rip you off every time the value of the money falls. There is a massive transfer of wealth that takes place from the unsuspecting masses to a predatory, let me use a proper terminology. That's one of you reminded me. The blood-sucking predatory elite, which is both in the domestic economy and in the international economy. And so the monetary system that we now have is a system which is haram based on this verse of the Quran, which is repeated 3 times in the Quran. Wala tabkhasun nasa ashya'ahum. Inflation. Suppose your grandfather died and he left you some money. This is your part of the inheritance. When you were a baby, he left you 100 dinars, gold dinars. When you were a baby, so your guardians had to put it away. So they put it in a box and they locked it. And 25 years later, you are grown up and you are sufficiently mature, and they feel you should get your money. So they opened the box and they took it out, and they gave you the 100 dinars. MashaAllah. The gold dinar had faithfully preserved what your father had left for you. Faithfully preserve the value of what your father had left for you. It has done that all through history. And they knew that. So what they did, Dajjal, in order to rule the world, not just to rip you off, it's more than that. In order to be able to eventually rule the world, was they took the 100 dinars out of the box and they put in paper. And they said, maybe this grandchild would love the US dollar because it is written there on the US dollar, in God we trust. Have you seen it? Take a look at it. In God we trust. So, mashallah, this is really the best of all money, isn't it? So, with 100 ounces of gold, they got 3,500 US dollars at $35 an ounce, and the Bretton Woods, right? So they took the $3,500 and put it in the box, and they locked it up. 25 years later, when you were a young man and sufficiently mature, they said you should get your money. So they opened the box and they took out the 3,500 US dollars and they gave it to you. But you rubbed your eyes and you said, excuse me, is this what my grandpa left for me? They said, no, grandpa left for you 100 dinars. And you then said, give me my 100 dinars, please, or that, report to the police. So they had to go very quickly to the market to change the US dollars back into dinars. And then they came and they gave you 8 dinars. 8 dinars. 92% of the money was lost, gone, because of inflation. I know of one man who would not take this sitting down. This man would ask, where did my money go? Who took my money? That's why they killed him, eh? Malcolm X. Who took my money? Where did my money go? It didn't evaporate in the clouds. And in the pursuit of those questions to seek the answers, he would have discovered that his loss was their gain. And this is what Allah speaks of in Surah An-Nisa. وَأَخْذِهِمُ الرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ. What did he say? Allah? وَأَخْذِهِمُ الرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ. Oh, it was haram for them. Allah made it haram for them. If they listen to this lecture, they will know I'm speaking the truth. In the Torah, it was haram for them. Nabi Isa alayhi salam made it haram for them. Riba. But when we go to the Torah, we find something else. Then the Torah now says it is haram for an Israelite to lend on interest to another Israelite. But it is halal for him to lend on interest to those who are not Israelites, the Ummiyun, translated as Gentiles, but otherwise known as cockroaches. So they changed the word of Allah in order to be able to become money lenders to the world. وَأَخْذِهِمُ الرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ وَأَكْلِهِمْ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ بِالْبَاطِلِ. And in the process, they were consuming the wealth of mankind unjustly. Because my loss was your gain. That's not business. And so, inflation all around the world today has its roots in riba, a fraudulent, bogus and fraudulent and haram monetary system. What is coming now, the new money that I call electronic and one of you called digital, because you got a new camera, digital. The new money which is coming to replace the paper money is coming not just to rip you off. Imagine, I have a bank account and all I need to do is, once I control the system, just type in on my computer. I get $1 million in my account. Abracadabra. And this sheikh out here, he's supporting the Palestinians. So I look and I see how much money he has. He can't stop me because the money is in the bank. And all the records are there. So I went and I typed something and his account is frozen. You know the word? Frozen. Who is he going to complain to? He lost his money. Can't get it. This is tomorrow. They can type in as much money as they want and type out as much money as they want. And once you are within their money system of the world, you're a slave to them. And so what is before us is not just exploitation, economic and monetary exploitation. It is slavery which is ahead of us, so that they can rule the world. So long as you are using that monetary system, you are on board the ship. So if the city is comfortable for you, the trains run on time, the supermarkets are so very nicely organized. You just go on the shelves and pick up what you want and go to the cashier, they pass it through a machine, and all the prices just come onto the screen. Have you seen it? Huh? My gosh, the city is like heaven. So if you want to live in heaven, remember you're on board the ship. If you want to get off this ship, however, Allah is testing you. It's not going to be easy to get off the ship. A man will have to flee to the mountainsides where rain falls and take with him some sheep and goats in order to protect and preserve faith. There are no toilets inside the house on the mountainside. And so the subject of the prohibition of riba has now assumed even more critical importance for us. Any questions before we go back to sleep? All right, I think we will call it a day over there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Order members, it's time now for questions to the Minister of Finance and Personnel. And can I advise members that question 13 has been withdrawn, and I call John Dallett.
Question Hain, Lascan Carla, Ledger Hull. Question number 1, Deputy Speaker, if you please.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, with your permission, I would like to answer questions 1, 4 and 7 together as they relate to the same issue of the impact of the Stormont House Agreement. The Stormont House Agreement provided up to £500 million over 10 years of new capital funding to support shared and integrated education. This funding will have an impact on the education budget. Individual projects must be agreed between the Executive and the UK Government. In addition to £50 million for shared and integrated education projects, the Stormont House Agreement provided up to £30 million in 2015-16 for bodies dealing with the past. It also confirmed the capital, the resource flexibility sought in the 2015-16 draft budget, increased this to allow a further £100 million of RRI borrowing to be used to fund the voluntary exit scheme, provided an additional £100 million of RRI borrowing for capital projects, and provided the flexibility to pay the £114 million welfare reform penalty from capital. The impact of the Stormont House Agreement on 2015-16 has been incorporated into the budget 15-16, which I announced on the 19th of January.
I call John Dallett for supplementary.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank the Minister for his very comprehensive answer. The Minister, of course, will be aware that there are roughly 250,000 people out there between 16 and 64 who have levels of literacy and numeracy that are well below what they could apply for a job or seek promotion or even educate their children. Minister, are you sure we're not going to create another generation of children who will leave school not able to read or write?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, clearly it is no one's desire in this House to see anyone condemned to the sort of educational underachievement that the member has outlined. And I think we would all accept from whatever quarter in this House that whilst Northern Ireland has a very good education system, that there are many who come through our education system with the highest of qualifications and are able to convert those qualifications into good university education, university degrees, and also into well-paying jobs, that there are some who unfortunately slip through the net. And I think that is something that we should all be deeply concerned about, one of the reasons why I was very pleased last week to boost the Department of Education's allocation in the budget, an uplift of £63 million for the aggregated schools budget, which the Minister has then further topped up by a reallocation within his own budget to take that to £80 million, an allocation which, of course, the member's own party voted against in the executive, and I hope that they have a chance tomorrow with a debate on the budget to rectify that position and support the education budget and an increase in the education budget. We've also further boosted the Department of Employment and Learning's budget as well, with allocations of around £35 million proposed within the budget, and some of those, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are successful change fund bids, one of which is actually deliberately for 14 to 16-year-olds who have issues and problems with educational achievement, and that is a joint project between the Department of Employment and Learning and the Department of Education. I think that's exactly the sort of project and scheme that I wanted to see coming forward through the Change Fund, and I think it's exactly the sort of scheme that this House should be supporting.
I call Oliver McMullen. I call Oliver McMullen.
Thank you for that answer. Can I ask you on the spend within your budget? I tabled a question to you, but maybe I can get it quicker today. On the spend not there within the ambulance service, where do you see that money going? Will you hand it to the Minister of Health, or what way is that money distributed to all the ambulance stations?
Can I remind members the questions on the education budget? Minister may wish to comment.
I can't specifically. I mean, the Health Minister has received, as the House will be aware, additional spending next year of £204 million over and above his allocation for 2014 to 15. That represents a 3.4% increase. The Executive took, I think, the right decision in not completely protecting DHSSPS's budget, but protected around 95% of that department's budget by protecting frontline health and social services provision, and that would include, as one of the, I think it's 6 trusts, the Ambulance Services Trust. So it has been afforded a degree of protection. It is a matter entirely, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for the Minister of Health as to where he spends that additional allocation that he has received. And even though that department would be perceived, Deputy Speaker, as one of the winners, to use that phrase, within the budget, I know that the Minister of Health, who I think is in the House later answering questions, would be the first to say that in spite of getting an additional £204 million, it is still a departmental budget which, because of demand and changing demographics, is one that is continually under pressure, even over and above a 3.5% increase in its budget.
I call Kieran McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his response. Can I ask the Minister how he will ensure, in fact guarantee, that this very warm, welcome additional funding, capital money, will make a real and substantial advance in the current pattern of segregated education throughout Northern Ireland?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I take it the member is referring to the additional allocation in terms of capital spend for shared and integrated education, because of course his ministers at the Executive voted against the increase in allocation to the Department of Education over and above the draft budget allocation. The shared and integrated education, the boost of £50 million a year, I think is very, very welcome over the next 10-year period, specifically for shared and integrated education projects. We are still working through with Her Majesty's Government the criteria that would be applied to make sure that they pass the test in terms of meeting the criteria that will be set for them in terms of being genuine shared and integrated education projects. I think it's important as we take these forward. I think there are a lot of good shared education schemes that are starting to work their way through the system. There was a call by the Minister of Education last year for ones to come forward. Some of those have passed muster and are receiving capital funding, not just this year but also in future years as well. It is important, I think, that one of the tests, one of the criteria that we apply to this additional funding, Deputy Speaker, is that it is capable of saving us money. And I think whilst there are other objectives around shared education in terms of bringing children from different backgrounds together to be educated in the one place, we can't lose sight of the fact as well that this is money that is there to help us to save money in the longer term. And in that sense, the shared education projects, not only being of good social and educational value, also will have to save us money in terms of our budget, because as the member knows and the House knows, in spite of what is, I think, a much better budget than the draft budget and better budget than we thought we might have been able to bring forward, there are still huge pressures moving forward, not least in the education sphere. So it's important that the projects that do come forward also help us to save some money.
I call Paul Girvan.
Thank the Minister for his answers thus far. And I'm just wondering, does the Minister share the concern expressed by some that the Executive is now too dependent upon borrowing?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was a point that was picked up by some during the debate last week, or the statement after the statement last week around the budget, that the Executive is now borrowing around £1.8 billion, and on the face of it, that's a lot of money. It compares unfavourably if you do a per head of the population calculation compared to the other devolved administrations in Scotland and in Wales. First point that's worth noting is that both Scotland and Wales would like to be able to borrow more, particularly in Wales. I met with the Welsh Finance Minister earlier this month. Her administration is only allowed to borrow £400 million, and she would like to borrow a lot more than that. It's actually quite envious of our ability to borrow up to £3 billion. The £1.8 billion that we have borrowed to date has been able to finance infrastructure projects that otherwise, Mr Deputy Speaker, would not have been able to be financed. And we have also been able to capitalise some costs around the Northern Ireland Civil Service equal pay claim and bring forward a rescue package for the Presbyterian Mutual Society. Again, that would not have been done and been able to be done without that ability to borrow that money. And as we move forward, whilst yes, there is a cost in terms of repaying the interest annually of around £3 to £4 million per £100 million that we borrow, it is significant, and I think has changed the Executive's approach to borrowing, that the £700 million flexibility that we are allowed with our RI borrowing to borrow specifically for a voluntary exit scheme will save for every £100 million we spend around £60 million. So about £500 million for that £700 million will be saved. And that obviously puts a very different complexion upon borrowing moving forward than it might have done without that payback that will come from a voluntary exit scheme.
I call Danny Kinahan.
Speaker, I mean, the Minister himself said that the budget was imperfect and there's much in it that many of us disagree with. But what's the extent of the remaining pressures that are on the Department of Education?
Mr Deputy Speaker, again, a question better directed at the Minister of Education himself. I did have conversations with the Minister of Education, as indeed I did have a meeting with all ministers leading up to discussions and agreement around the budget, and I understand that the Minister himself was bringing forward pressures of £160 million within the budget. It had been reduced by under £100 million in the draft budget. I think there was roughly another £60 million worth of pressures. Now, I'm sure that if the member and I were to pore over all of those pressures, we may not be in agreement with the Minister of Education that they were all legitimate pressures, or that the totality of them were legitimate in terms of the cost pressures being placed upon that department. But very, very clearly, the additional allocation of £60 million, which was the lion's share, as I described it, of that additional money that was being allocated, will go some way to help the Minister particularly, and I think this was my primary concern, I think it ought to have been the House's primary concern, that the impact of reductions in expenditure, which the Department will still face, should be limited away from the classroom. And certainly that £63 million allocation, which the Members' Party also voted against, topped up by additional allocation by the Minister of Education himself to a total of £80 million, will certainly assist in ensuring that the classroom is protected and defended in the next financial year.
Moving on, I call Raymond McCartney.
The whole question number 2, please.
With your permission, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to answer questions 2, 3, 5 and 12 together, as they all relate to the transfer of corporation tax rate setting powers. As I'm sure members are aware, the UK Government introduced the Corporation Tax Northern Ireland Bill into the House of Commons on the 8th of January 2015. This will enable the transfer of corporation tax rate setting powers to the Northern Ireland Assembly from April 2017. The passage of the bill through the UK Parliament is conditional on the implementation of key measures to deliver sustainable finances for Northern Ireland. And therefore, while I welcome the progress that has been made so far, this momentum must be maintained. In terms of the proposed design of the Northern Ireland regime, Her Majesty's Government has indicated that it is confident that this will be Azores compliant. That view has been reached because Northern Ireland has institutional autonomy and it has its own administrative status. It will have procedural autonomy since this Assembly will have the ability to set a rate free from Westminster influence. And furthermore, it will have economic autonomy because the block grant here will be adjusted to reflect the corporation tax revenues forgone by Her Majesty's Government. With regards to the economic impact, research commissioned by the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Investment demonstrates a very strong case for reducing corporation tax. The research conducted by Ulster University's Economic Policy Centre suggests that if a reduced rate of 12.5% was implemented from April 2017, productivity would be 5.9% higher by 2033 than it otherwise would have been. In addition, the economy would be 11% larger and 37,500 net new jobs would be created. Of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, the potential benefits and associated costs of a reduced corporation tax will depend on the rate that is struck and the timing of when that lower rate might be applied. Ultimately, these will be matters for the Executive and Assembly to decide in due course.
I call Raymond McCartney for supplementary.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his very comprehensive answer. In relation to one of the procedures, and that's the ability to lower or strike an appropriate rate, does the Minister agree with the court decision that that should be a matter for the Assembly without any external interference?
I mean, that's a key condition, Deputy Speaker, of the Azores ruling, as well as having economic and administrative autonomy, that we are able to set procedurally our own level of corporation tax. And obviously that's a matter for, but something that the Executive will have to ponder and consider and decide upon actually very, very quickly. Our budgets for the next 3 or 4 years after 2015-16 will be largely set out by the comprehensive spending review that whatever administration is formed in London after the general election in May. You never know who might be involved in influencing that. Will have a comprehensive spending review that will cover 3 or 4 years, and that will obviously overlap with the timing in terms of our ability to reduce corporation tax rate from April 2017 onwards. But very, very clearly over the next 6 months or so, this Assembly, this Executive will have to take a very clear decision about where it wants to go in respect of this issue. There is a wealth of evidence out there in terms of the benefits that there are, and it doesn't matter what piece of research is done, they are more or less the same in terms of the benefits that there would be to Northern Ireland. And clearly there are issues that we have to consider around cost and how we might pay for the inevitable reduction in our block grant. These are issues that the Executive will have to ponder and the Executive will recommend to this Assembly. But the member is absolutely right. These are entirely in the hands of Executive Ministers and members of this Assembly.
I call Trevor Lunn.
Yes, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I apologise, it was quite hard to hear the Minister down here today for some reason. But I think he said that a 12.5% rate of corporation tax would produce an estimated productivity gain of 5.9%. How does he square that, or would he agree with his ministerial colleague, the Minister for Enterprise, who gave the opinion recently that the introduction of corporation tax would actually produce a £3,000 per annum increase in the average wage packet?
The result, or the work carried out by the Ulster University's Northern Ireland Economic Policy Centre follows on from work carried out by others, by Oxford Economics. In fact, it actually builds on the work that was done by Oxford Economics in the past. And this piece of work suggests that there will be a net new job increase of 37,500, so nearly 40,000 jobs, which is not far off previous estimates as well. It does show that there would be an increase in productivity by around 2033 of 5.9%, and that the economy as a whole would grow by 11%. Now, the issue, I think, was not well reported by the BBC in terms of what the Enterprise Minister said in terms of increases in salaries. And very clearly, if your economy is growing, and it's growing by over 11%, if you're bringing in 40,000 new jobs, and those new jobs are going to be higher paid new jobs, the average effect across the economy would be around 3,000 of an increase in salaries. So, there is undoubtedly the case, if the economy is growing, if you are bringing in more jobs and they are higher paid jobs, there will be an increase in average salaries across Northern Ireland. That is something that those of us who have been very supportive of the devolution of corporation tax, that's what we've wanted to see. That is backed up by the research that has been carried out by various institutions on our behalf and indeed not on our behalf. And that's something that, that is the prize of corporation tax. There is a cost involved and there will be difficult decisions required around that. But the benefits of doing it, particularly when you look at what other states who have reduced, particularly the south of Ireland, what they have been able to do in terms of reducing their corporation tax rate and the investment that that has brought, and even in very difficult times, was still the backbone of their economy and is now boosting their economy into growth. This is a prize that is worth pursuing and will, I hope, result in not just 40,000 new jobs, but more, and further investment by local firms, as well as attracting in foreign direct investment.
I call Patsy McGlone.
In regard to the introduction of a lowered corporation tax, can the Minister advise as to what measures will be taken or can be taken to ensure that existing regional economic imbalances won't be exacerbated?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm not sure what procedurally has happened in terms of who's been called, but the reduced rate of corporation tax will apply to all firms across Northern Ireland, irrespective of where they are located. And I've had occasion to visit the members' constituency, indeed Mr McRae's constituency as well, and visiting some of our biggest manufacturers who are based in that neck of the woods. I think it's one of our sort of almost well-hidden secrets that 40% of the world's mobile screening equipment is made in County Tyrone. And there are firms who have already invested there, I think, who would be well placed to expand. And Northern Ireland, within the sort of group portfolio that many of those, because there's Swedish-owned companies, American-owned companies operating in County Tyrone, who would perhaps see a reduced rate of corporation tax as an opportunity to expand their operations there. So this is not a policy that is particularly aimed at benefiting one part of Northern Ireland over another. Indigenous firms, irrespective of where they're located, will be paying a lower rate of corporation tax, and clearly it is up to all of us right across Northern Ireland, aided and assisted by Invest Northern Ireland, but also with the new local government institutions in place to try to work to attract investment into whether it be Mid-Ulster or whatever part of Northern Ireland. So I think it is something that will reap benefits for everyone in Northern Ireland, in all parts of Northern Ireland.
I call Ian McRae.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. A lot has been talked about budgets and trying to sort out departmental budgets. Can the Minister outline what work has been done in respect of preparing for any reduction that may come about with the reduction in corporation tax?
Mr Deputy Speaker, there's no work as such included within the 2015-16 budget, which is laid before the House last week and we debated tomorrow. And that's because we don't have to deal with the reduction in the block grant. Won't come until we have reduced the rate of corporation tax here in Northern Ireland, and there is that gap then. And that won't be until its earliest, until the financial year 2017-18, as I pointed out to Mr McCartney earlier, as the executive plans for whether it be a 3 or a 4-year budget coming out of the next comprehensive spending review. That is obviously something that we will have to bear in mind in crafting that budget, which will actually have to be done towards the end part of this year. What I was keen to do, and the executive agreed, though it was important that the budget for 15-16 do as much as it can in order to plan in a more material way for, rather than the reduction in spending, but in terms of skills and continuing to attract investment. And a lot of now that we have the legislation proceeding through Westminster, it is a good time for Invest Northern Ireland to change what it does and go out and sell Northern Ireland as a place to invest in anticipation of a lower rate of corporation tax. That's why I was keen to support and enhance their budget, and their budget has increased by over 10% next year. Similarly, it is important that we still create a pipeline of skilled workers, who are the engine of any economy. And whilst we weren't able to fill in all of the hole and the gap within the Department of Employment and Learning, there's been targeted investment of around £35 million in key areas, including the development of more skills in conjunction with the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Investment. So in that regard, whilst the budget doesn't particularly deal with corporation tax, it does deal with aspects including skills and economic development, which are preparing us for the day whenever we do have a reduced rate of corporation tax and the economy hopefully grows as a result.
I call Mike Nesbitt.
Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. I wonder, in terms of setting a rate, whether the Minister feels it's a question of matching the Republic, bettering the Republic, or whether it's a question of ensuring that those making the investment decisions feel that any differential has become irrelevant, given the other benefits, such as the skilled workforce, that would be accruing to investors here in Northern Ireland.
These are, Mr. Deputy Speaker, these are important points that are very much worthy of discussion, and the Executive would be wrong to proceed just directly to a particular rate, because that's the rate that it has in mind. And there are, and I think it's worth noting that over the last number of years, whilst we haven't been able to compete for some of the higher-end, higher-tech jobs of the Irish Republic, we have competed pretty well, and we stand out in a UK context as the second best region outside, London being the #1 for attracting in foreign direct investment per head of the population. That's something I think that we should be very proud of in Northern Ireland, and that is testimony to, for example, our skilled workforce, but it's also testimony to some of the other policies that this Executive has pursued around high-speed broadband access, around ensuring that there's good collaboration between our universities and our colleges and business. And there's also other costs which are not affected by the Executive directly, such as the low rate of the low rental cost of office accommodation and Grade A office accommodation, particularly in Belfast City Centre. So there are other reasons which do attract in investment into Northern Ireland, and they are issues that I think have to be factored into any conversation and ultimately decision that the Executive makes around what rate of corporation tax it wants to set, now that we have the ability to do that.
Moving on, I call David McNary.
Question 6.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, my department has introduced a range of shared services in relation to HR, training and IT, which were previously the responsibility of individual departments, and together realise efficiencies of around £12 million per year. My department has also recently commissioned an independent review of Northern Ireland Civil Services HR arrangements that will make recommendations on the future HR organisational structures and staffing levels. This may result in further rationalisation. Following on from the Stormont House Agreement, I am considering a range of measures aimed at helping departments live within their 2015-16 budget and beyond for consideration by the Executive. The proposed reduction in the number of departments will also assist in the process of rationalising functions.
I call David McNary for supplementary.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I appreciate the Minister's answer. Could he give a timescale now for the rationalisation of the current departments down to 9, and perhaps outline their envisaged central functions?
Whilst I very much welcome the reduction in the number of executive departments, something that my party thought was wrong back in 1999 when the current 10 departments were created. Whenever we've been consistent in this House, in fact, one of the first motions that I brought into this House as a backbencher was calling for a reduction in the number of departments. I'm very glad that that is now happening, and that will certainly be able to, the Executive will be able to save some money as a result of that rationalisation. It will not be enough, unfortunately, to deal with the various budgetary problems that we have. I think the bigger prize actually is that, particularly in areas where there has been disjointed approach in terms of policy and policy development and policy implementation, that will be brought under the auspices of one department moving forward, and should therefore, it's not just about cheaper government, it's about smarter government as well. And that's something I welcome, and very much welcome the savings that will accrue from that. It's not something that's been taken forward by my department. It has been taken forward by the Office of First Minister and Deputy First Minister. But the Executive discussed this issue last week, and things are proceeding positively. And I expect that when legislation is brought to this House and hopefully passed, that we'll be in a position to see a reduction in the number of government departments from the start of the new mandate in 2016.
I call Peter Weir.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Minister what opportunities exist to expand the use of shared services across the public sector?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Executive parties, the 5 parties, agreed on the 19th of December a range of reform and restructuring measures which went to Her Majesty's Government as part of our negotiations and discussion around the Stormont House Agreement. I then subsequently developed that into a reform and restructuring plan, which has gone to and passed the Executive last Thursday, and that includes various elements. It includes a voluntary exit scheme, which was mentioned earlier, but it also includes the expansion of shared services, because whilst there has been a lot of consolidation, rationalisation at a central departmental level, that hasn't always expanded out into arm's length bodies and other agencies. So the Executive has now agreed that every central government body should be brought onto shared services platforms whenever contracts permit, and that also, interestingly, that local government, given where they are in terms of reform, should also be encouraged to avail of the opportunities that our shared services around IT and HR and networks and other areas present for them to save money, and save money very, very quickly, actually, as well.
I call Joe Byrne.
I thank the Minister for his answers. Can the Minister give an assurance to people in the public service that the voluntary exit scheme will be a voluntary scheme and administered in a fair and equitable way within the functional needs of the public service in general?
Sir, Deputy Speaker, I have no difficulty in confirming that a voluntary exit scheme will be voluntary. It will be a 4-year scheme. Again, the Executive has agreed various outline issues around it. We have agreed to create a transformation fund which will be administered by a steering group headed up by the head of the civil service. And it will be a 4-year scheme, and the £700 million that has been the flexibility that has been permitted by the Stormont House Agreement will allow us to populate that fund, and we will hopefully be, there's some agreement has still to be reached in some of the mechanics of it all, but after we've had consultation with the trade unions, it will hopefully be open for applications from around March of this year, with the first civil servants, public servants leaving and availing of the voluntary exit scheme around about the end of the summer, early autumn period.
And that is the end of the period for listed questions, and now we move on to topical questions. And I call Dolores Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And many of the earlier questions were around the budget for the year ahead. Minister, could you give us any insight into the programme for government for the year ahead, and particularly across DSD, if there is going to be, as predicted, a fall-off from the executive target of 2,000 social houses to 1,500 in the year ahead?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm sure you have noticed as well as me, as whilst this is supposedly questions to the Minister of Finance and Personnel, it is morphed very quickly into questions for virtually every other minister within the Executive. The programme for government and updating the programme for government and extending it by a further year because of the extension in our mandate isn't a responsibility of my department. It is a responsibility of the Office of First Minister and Deputy First Minister to take forward. It is that extension by a year, whilst there will be some new targets that will be put in, and I know that my own department will be adding in additional targets for a revised programme for government. Many of the existing targets will have already been met and therefore don't need to continue. Some of them do continue, and the budget has a bearing on those targets because departments don't know whether they can achieve an extension of that target if they don't have the same amount of money within their budget going towards that particular area of spend. So now that the budget is set for next year and subject to agreement, obviously, by the House tomorrow, that allows the various departments to proceed with updating, revising, changing, altering, whatever is required, the programme for government targets that are relevant to them.
I call Dolores Kelly for supplementary.
I hear the chastisement in the Minister's response, but given that it is the cart before the horse, per usual in this Assembly, it should come as no surprise that should ask such questions. Therefore, Minister, in relation to your own portfolio, could you tell me what is your ambition for the year ahead in asset sales and how much do you hope to raise?
The Executive has set a target in the budget of around £158 million of capital receipts, which includes asset sales. The original draft budget proposal that came forward from officials was 108 million, and we thought that was not ambitious enough, so we've increased that by that target by £50 million. Sometimes, in terms of terminology, we talk about that £158 million as asset sales. It's not all asset sales. Some of it will be the repayment of, for example, financial transactions capital that has been lent out to the private sector will be coming back, and the repayments come back in as capital receipts. So do repayment of co-ownership loans and things like that, and some other housing aspects as well. So there's a target which I don't think is too ambitious, of having had 108 million already identified, to expand that by roughly 50% to take it up by another 50 million. Where the market is at this minute in time, with some activity starting to move and assets starting to sell, I think it's not an unreasonable target for us to have, and I hope that we and trust that we will make it, and that money will be able to be used then for investment in capital elsewhere.
I now call Robin Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Minister will be aware that some of the largest contracts available to businesses in Northern Ireland would be those contracts that are coming out of government and government departments. I just wonder if the Minister would outline what success local companies have in accessing those contracts.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the executive spends roughly £2.7–2.8 billion a year in terms of contracts for goods and services and for capital projects. Between April and December of 2014, so the first 9 months of last year, Centres of Procurement Expertise in Northern Ireland awarded 2,277 contracts, which had a total value of around £1.2 billion. Interestingly, 83% of those contracts were awarded to SMEs, and 75% of contracts were awarded to Northern Ireland firms. So I think the perception sometimes is that Northern Ireland firms don't win in our government procurement system. I think a situation where 3/4 are going to Northern Ireland firms and 83% are going to SMEs, which is obviously dominating our economy, shows that our government procurement system is open for business and very much open for local business.
I call Robin Newton.
Thank the Minister for his answer, and certainly those statistics are very encouraging. Can the Minister outline perhaps any more specific steps that he is taking that might indeed further encourage Northern Ireland companies, in particular SMEs, to secure contracts with government?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think those figures, those statistics are probably quite revealing for many people who think that the numbers would instinctively think the numbers are much lower than 75% being awarded to Northern Ireland firms. It's not a situation where I think we can rest on our laurels. I think we should be doing everything that we possibly can within the law, which is very much governed by EU directives, which have changed and are currently in the process of changing. And are changing, Deputy Speaker, I believe, in a way that will assist local firms and SMEs to gain more contracts. A couple of things that I can think of that we are actively involved in trying to encourage our small, medium-sized enterprises to get involved in procurement, because many of them, I think, are put off by the size and scale of them, and perhaps even sometimes the complexity. CPD, Centre Procurement Directorate, has been working very closely with Intertrade Ireland, who runs several Meet the Buyer events across Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland each year. I attended one recently at the Remit Hotel in Shaw's Bridge, and there was several hundred local. There was lots of public sector buyers from both sides of the border, and there were hundreds and hundreds of local companies speaking to them about what they offer, what they could, and just having a good conversation about what might be possible. And I think a lot of business was done at that and done as a result of all of that. Another way in which I'm trying to simplify the process so that local SMEs can see much more clearly what work is going on is to launch a new tendering system in April of this year, which we call e-tenders NI, and that will simplify and standardise our approach, making it easier for firms in Northern Ireland to complete tenders. So anything that we can do digitally, process-wise, or just introducing local firms with those within the public sector on both sides of the border. Actually, I think there's huge opportunities for us to sell, and Northern Ireland firms to sell into the Irish Republic as well. I think it's something that we'll continue to pursue.
I now call John Dallat.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I know the Minister will be as disturbed as I am at the upsurge in criminal activity of paramilitary groups leading to the murder of Brian Michael Haga and Ballymoney. Is the Minister satisfied that these people are not getting money out of the meagre resources for this Assembly, masquerading as community workers, political researchers, or all the other lofty titles that they may give themselves?
I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we would be all very concerned, all very worried. If any public funds, or indeed any funds, whatever the direction they were coming from, were finding their way into the pockets of criminal gangs, of paramilitary organisations, irrespective of what community they come from. Because, as the member would agree with me, people, whether they be loyalists in their persuasion or Republican in their persuasion, have nothing to offer this country. They only wish to drag us back. there is no support within the community for what they do. And that's why I'm very, very keen that, as I'm sure the whole House is, in pursuing all of those who are involved in paramilitary activity, those who are involved in criminal activity should be pursued and brought to justice. I think it's very important that the Minister of Justice, who has been trying to take forward, Deputy Speaker, proposals in respect of extending the remit of the National Crime Agency to Northern Ireland, that happens, and that happens forthwith. Because with the support of the National Crime Agency and a whole range of crimes, some hideous crimes that have been in the media, where the assistance of the National Crime Agency elsewhere in the United Kingdom has been able to bring people to justice, but that has been denied to us here in Northern Ireland. I think it is high time that those who have been a roadblock in this place to the NCA extending its remit to Northern Ireland, that resistance yields and allows us to get the benefits of the NCA operating here in Northern Ireland.
I call John Dallop for supplementary.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the Minister for his comprehensive answer, which I accept has been absolutely genuine. He may know that King John in his day had a triple lock on his chest of gold. Despite the best efforts, perhaps, is the Minister not not satisfied that we really need to redouble our efforts if this Assembly is to have a fair wind and is free from paramilitaries and all their activities?
Mr Deputy Speaker, I have certainly no evidence has come to me in recent times about money being spent by whatever source within the public sector, certainly within the remit of this executive, going into dissident Republicans or indeed any paramilitary organisations. If members do have evidence of that, I would encourage and urge them immediately to raise that with the appropriate minister or with myself, and I'd pass it on. I think that the audit situation that we have in terms of many funds, I'm thinking particularly of the Peace Fund, Peace 3, Peace 4, as it will now be. Sometimes some within the community complain of it being too rigorous and too difficult, and I think that it is important to balance testing properly with ensuring that people can go about their business. Those who are legitimate can do it without having too much difficulty. So sometimes I think what we do in terms of scrutinising the work can sometimes be criticised as being a little bit too rigorous and too onerous. But given the difficulties that we have experienced in Northern Ireland in the past, and some difficulties that there may even currently be, I think it's still important that we ensure that level of scrutiny is there.
I call Samuel Gardner.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm sure the Minister will be pleased that I will not be putting a question to him because he has already answered it. Thank you, Minister.
Ian Milne is not in his place. I call Fergal McKinney.
Deputy Speaker, I wondered, could the Minister outline what are the implications for EU funding in relation to waste to energy, were the mollusk plant not to go ahead?
So there's a little bit of noise in the chamber, I think, but I think he was asking what are the plans for that money if it doesn't go ahead?
Implications for EU funding were not to go ahead.
There is no. There may well be in terms of the particular project that the member raises. It is a large project which will, if it goes ahead, obviously it is subject to planning permission and has to go through various processes in respect of that. And I certainly wouldn't want in my position to be influencing that one, or be seen to be influencing that one way or the other. I am not aware, although I wouldn't rule out there being the possibility of EU funding being secured by the developers of that scheme. The only interaction that I have had with that scheme has been through the budget and a bid that was put in by the Department of the Environment, who were working with the Strategic Investment Board for the development of a bid that may use financial transactions capital, which is of course a source of capital funding that we receive as an executive from Westminster and not from Europe.
I call Fergal McKinney for supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister. But maybe just hone this a little bit. My understanding was that there was money set aside in the Executive, and basically what I'm asking is, were it not to go ahead, is there flexibility for it to be spent elsewhere?
I think we've been sort of cross purposes, and I thought that was perhaps initially what he was asking. He mentioned European funding, which sort of confused me a little. There is an allocation of indicative allocation of 50 million aside that project. That project developed as a result of work that was being carried out by the member's own Minister's Department and the Department of the Environment, who had been working with the Strategic Investment Board and had identified it as a possible project which could avail of financial transactions capital. And the member will be aware that the House has had, or my department has had difficulty in allocating all of our financial transactions capital both in year, and thankfully we're able to deposit around £40 million to the University of Ulster, Ulster University. I still can't get my head around to calling it by its new name, which has eaten up all of the financial transactions capital allocation for this year. There is a large £50 million allocation against this project for next year, and obviously that project is subject to planning permission. Should that not go ahead, that creates a difficulty for me in terms of getting that money spent. And the broader point around this is that the creation of the Northern Ireland Investment Fund, which I announced in the draft budget and topped up with a further allocation in the final budget, is an opportunity for us to deposit money from financial transactions capital that may not be spent in year to be spent on projects in future years. So, whilst I would be concerned if the project wasn't able to absorb that amount of money, I accept that it may not be able to because it is subject to planning and various other processes. Whilst it would create some difficulty for us in spending that, I will continue to encourage ministers to bring forward schemes that can use financial transactions capital so that we can use all of this, whilst new but very, very difficult source of funding to spend.
And that is the end of questions to the Minister of Finance.